The Wrong Man, The Murder of Father Hubert Dahme, 1924. Father Hubert Dahme put on his coat and stepped outside for his usual evening walk in downtown Bridgeport, Connecticut. The popular Catholic priest had been a pastor for 30 years, the last 20 of which were spent at St. Joseph's Roman Catholic Church. When he reached the intersection of High Street and Main Street at about 7:45 p.m., streetlights lit the way on the cold winter night of February 4, 1924. Suddenly, a man approached Father Dahme from behind and raised his right hand. With the muzzle close to the priest's head, he fired a shot. The shooter then turned and ran in a westerly direction along High Street, up a hill, and disappeared. Dahme fell to the ground. He had been shot through the left ear with a .32 caliber revolver. He was rushed to St. Vincent's Hospital, where he died an hour later, while priests and nuns knelt reciting the litany for the dying in the corridor outside his ward. He never regained consciousness. The murder generated public interest because of Dahme's prominence, the brutality of the crime, and the public place in which the murder was carried out. A reward was offered for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the murderer. Police felt pressure to find, arrest, and convict the killer, but they couldn't obtain accurate information about exactly what had happened. Witnesses disagreed about the sequence of events. Some said that a person matching the killer's description had been seen walking with Dahme on several occasions 7 to 10 days before the shooting. Other witnesses said they saw two men fleeing the scene of the murder in a southerly direction along Main Street. 3 witnesses walking together on High Street saw a man running away just after the shot went off. One young woman said that she heard the fatal gunshot as she drove by the spot where the murder occurred. After parking the vehicle, she ran back to see what had happened. She was nearly knocked over along the way by 2 men running in the opposite direction. The timing was such that it was possible they were fleeing the scene of the crime. Witnesses also varied in their descriptions of the killer, but they agreed that he was of medium build, relatively young, and wore a gray cap and a dark, 3/4-length overcoat with a velvet collar. 8 days later, on the night of February 11, Harold Israel was walking down the street in Norwalk, Connecticut. He was from Bridgeport and was on his way to Pennsylvania to visit his father. He had arrived in town that day but had neither money nor a place to sleep. A police officer thought he was acting in an unusual manner. He picked up Israel and brought him to the police station. During the search, he found a .32 caliber revolver on him, the same type of weapon that had been used to kill Father Dahme. 4 chambers were loaded and 1 was empty. Israel was asked if he knew anything about the murder of Father Dahme. He said that he had heard about it and that 2 of his buddies were near the scene when it happened. He was convicted for carrying a concealed weapon and sent to the county jail in Bridgeport on February 12. After he arrived there, he was taken to the police station for questioning. His interrogation began at noon on February 13, 1924, and finally ended more than 24 hours later on February 14 at about 4 p.m. Although police did not physically assault Israel to try to obtain a confession, he was subjected to prolonged and intense questioning for hours at a time. Israel kept insisting to police that he was innocent and that he was in a movie theater at the time of the killing. He had been living on Stratford Avenue and sharing a room with his friends Charles Clint and Nick Cardullo. They had met while they were stationed in Panama with the U.S. Army. The room was located above the Philadelphia Lunch Restaurant. After 28 hours of police questioning, Israel, out of despair, finally confessed to killing Dahme. Once police had obtained a confession, they set about building a case. They asked Israel where they could find the cartridge for the bullet that had killed Dahme. He told them that it was in the bathroom of his rooming house. Police investigated and found one there. They assumed that it was from the gun that had fired the fatal shot. Then they took Israel in a car along the presumed course of the shooter's escape route. According to officers, he pointed out where he saw the man and 2 women on High Street, in the corner where he stumbled. Witnesses were brought to the station, where they identified Israel as the man they had seen running from the scene of the crime. Police believed that they now had their killer. Israel was arraigned in the city court of Bridgeport on the morning of February 15 on a charge of first-degree murder. Police then contacted Charles J. Van Armberg, who had once worked with the Remington Arms Company and was familiar with firearms and the manufacturing of various weapons. He was a former instructor in marksmanship and ordnance work who was now working with the police department in Boston. He examined Israel's revolver and the bullet that had killed Dahme. He concluded that Israel's revolver had fired the bullet that had killed Dahme. Then waitress Nellie Trafton stepped forward. She worked at the Star Restaurant in Bridgeport on the northwest corner of Main and Arch Streets, a block from the murder scene. Trafton had met Israel and his two roommates when she worked at Philadelphia Lunch, downstairs from where they lived. A customer at the Star Restaurant overheard her saying that she knew Israel and believed he was guilty. She claimed that he had once shown her a revolver and said he would kill someone with it. She said that she had seen him walk past the restaurant about 5 or 10 minutes before the murder. The coroner investigating the case examined eyewitness statements, ballistics, and the confession. He issued a 10-point report on February 25, 1924, outlining the evidence against Israel. He concluded that the police had found Dahme's killer. His evidence included statements by Trafton and 8 witnesses, statements that the killer wore a gray cap and brown overcoat, eyewitness identification of Israel at police headquarters, the signed confession, the fact that Israel went over the killer's flight route with police, the accused statement that indicated where the empty shell could be found, and the match between the fatal bullet and Israel's gun. After the coroner had issued his report, the presumably airtight case was referred to the Fairfield County State's Attorney's Office. Attorney Homer Cummings believed that Israel was probably guilty, but he also knew that the conclusion was arrived at through a combination of circumstantial evidence. He decided to investigate the evidence himself just to be certain. As Cummings later explained to the New York Times, it is just as important for a state's attorney to use the great powers of his office to protect the innocent as it is to convict the guilty. Cummings interviewed key witnesses and the accused, studied the ballistics report, and had doctors examine Israel. The physicians concluded that Israel was in a state of high anxiety and was physically and mentally exhausted at the time of his confession. Therefore, he was in no condition to make a reliable statement to police. On February 18, after he had had a chance to rest, Israel retracted his confession. He told doctors and Cummings that he had confessed because he was so tired that he would admit to anything to get an opportunity to rest. Plus, evidence was being stacked against him. Doctors said that Israel was of low intelligence, docile, and not prone to violence. He also had a weak will and was prone to the suggestion of others. Cummings pointed out that Israel's inconsistent statements about his involvement with the Dahme murder should have been a red flag to investigators. First he denied guilt, then he confessed, and then he finally recanted. The state's attorney also wanted to test the validity of the eyewitness testimony that had been given to police. He and an assistant went out onto the street at about 8 p.m. one evening to reenact the crime. The streetlight nearest where Dahme was gunned down was 50 yards away. While his assistant stood where the priest was shot, Cummings placed himself at the same distance from which witnesses claimed to have seen the murderer fleeing the scene. Given the little amount of light available, Cummings was unable to see the features of someone whom he knew well. He concluded that witnesses would not have been able to see the murderer's features clearly from where they were standing. Next, they went to the Star Restaurant to talk to waitress Nellie Trafton about what she saw the night of the murder. She told them that she went to use the cash register at the front of the restaurant at about 7:35 p.m., about 10 minutes before the murder. She glanced out the window and saw Israel walk by at a leisurely pace. He waved and she waved back. Cummings stood where Trafton said she had been standing when Israel walked by. The front of the restaurant had 2 windows with a brightly lit space in between to display fruits and other items for sale. The exterior window had lettering on it. The prosecutor discovered that distortion caused by the double windows made it difficult to clearly see the features of anyone standing on the sidewalk or walking by. His assistant tried as well and came to the same realization. When Cummings learned that Trafton had applied for the reward that was offered for information leading to an arrest in connection with the murder, he concluded that she had a motive to be less than truthful about having seen Israel before Dahme was shot. Having discredited the confession and eyewitnesses, Cummings set his sights on the ballistics evidence in the case. He learned that Israel's landlady had found another shell in the same bathroom where police had earlier located the one that was admitted into evidence. It appeared that her tenants practiced target shooting in the woods and would drop shells carelessly, sometimes in their bathroom. Cummings consulted 6 ballistics experts about the match that Van Amberg said he had made between the fatal bullet and Israel's revolver. Van Amberg rested his claim largely on similarities between photos of the crucial bullet and photos of the bullets that he had test-fired from the gun of the accused. Cummings noticed that the images did not line up exactly when placed on top of each other. The 6 ballistics experts agreed. They concluded that, in fact, it disproved Van Amberg's conclusion because the grooves of the 2 bullets didn't match. The fatal bullet had indentations that the bullet from Israel's gun did not. There was no smoking gun. If Israel wasn't at the corner of Main and High Streets at 7:45 p.m. when the murder occurred on February 4, 1924, where was he? Israel told police that he had gone to the Empire Theater at 7 p.m. to see a movie and emerged at about 9 p.m. He said that he saw 4 films: The Fighting Skipper, The Mystery Girl, The Leather Pushers, and The Ghost of the Dungeon. Cummings asked Israel what film was being shown when he entered the theater. The Leather Pushers, he replied. He went on to explain that he saw the last part of it and stayed in the theater until it was shown again. The manager of the theater corroborated the order in which the films were shown and at what time. Israel's alibi held up. If he was in the theater, then clearly he could not have been at the scene of the murder. The case went to court on May 28, 1924. Cummings spoke for 90 minutes, methodically discrediting every piece of evidence the police had brought against Israel. He also pointed out that Israel's cap wasn't gray, it was more of a greenish olive color. The state was dropping the charges, he announced. When he was finished speaking, the courtroom audience sat in stunned silence. Then they stood and applauded. Harold Israel burst into tears. He was a free man. Cummings determined that mistaken eyewitness accounts had led to Israel's imprisonment in the first place. He shone a light on the fact that eyewitness testimony is not as accurate as one may be led to believe. In an interview with the New York Times in 1935, he gave an example. Assume that after a light fall of snow in the early hours of the morning an animal passes over the ground near a house, he said. Hours later an expert can tell by examining the footprints whether the animal was a rabbit, a possum or fox. Assume, on the other hand, that 3 men standing at a distance in the half-light of dawn saw that animal pass. The chances are that not one of them would agree as to the breed of animal they saw. The eyewitness testimony would be much less conclusive than that of the expert who never even saw the animal. This explanation came 2 years after U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt had named Cummings his first Attorney General of the United States. The dramatic story of how Harold Israel was saved from the hangman's noose subsequently attracted Hollywood's attention. In 1947, Louis de Rochemont produced a film for 20th Century Fox about the murder and Israel's subsequent trial. If you like my channels, please subscribe it.